I hate microphones. Okay, so my announcement is that I've started my own spoken word salon known as Jilliana's Spoken Word Salon. And it's the first Tuesday of the month, 7:30 to 11:15, with a break between 9 and 9:15. And it's in Fudgy's Bistro Cum Lounge. Really nice. It's just by Hove Library. Fudgy's is their lovely dog. So there's a dog there. It's very dog friendly. You can even bring your own dogs. And the next one is Tuesday the 5th of March. That'll be the third one. So all wordsmiths are welcome. Not to read from novels. It's storytelling and poetry. Not comedy or stand-up comedy, because there are other places for that. Okay, hope to see you. Right, I've just come back from Mallorca, and people start telling me their stories, things that have happened to them in their lives. And I've started making notes because otherwise I can't keep up. And I met a lovely guy called Nigel who's living in Mallorca, and this is Nigel's story. And it's called Nigel's Story, A Narrow Escape. I'm always fascinated and yet sincerely interested when people I meet seem compelled to tell me their true life stories. Such was the case when I had the pleasure of spending the day with Nigel Higgins, not related to the professor, now in his early 50s and happily living on his finca far from the maddening crowd in Santa Margalida, Mallorca. Nigel was a reformed bad boy, having spent 15 years living in Italy, where he learned to speak excellent, fluent Italian with the well-known alternative mutoid waste community. You'll have to look that up, like I did. Nigel wanted to tell me of a crazy night when he was 16 in 1984, just after he had finished his O-levels back in England. I listened carefully, making some word prompt notes. He was hitching with his then best friend Glenn Wilkinson in France for 20 days without any money and with the inevitable backpack and sleeping bag. Nigel described himself as a blonde, new romantic punk whose idol was David Bowie come Ziggy Stardust. On the road to San Rafael in the south of France, young pretty boy Nigel and his mate stopped a two-door dark blue Peugeot driven by an older man called Jean-Paul. It was getting dark and the boys were desperate for a ride. Any ride, but not to be taken for a ride. The car screeched to a halt and they both piled into the back seat, tired, sweaty and hungry. The stranger spoke impeccable English and was exceptionally friendly. He introduced himself as Jean-Paul through the reflection of the car mirror. Nigel could not stop thinking how much the driver looked like the current Polish Pope, Jean-Paul II, a most uncanny resemblance. Out of politeness and being typically British, he said nothing, being the guest in his host's car. Midnight, the hour of the pumpkin was arriving as they sped to San Rafael. Jean-Paul offered to put them up for the night in his flat. He knew in advance his live-in Asian boyfriend Sanjay had prepared a delicious, authentic curry with basmati rice and accompanying homemade chutneys. How could the starving boys refuse? The Peugeot purred into a smart underground car park. Up they went in the lift to a modern but comfortable abode. Indian wood statues and ethnic paintings adorned the walls, and the large glass dining table with 4 carved wooden monkeys holding up the beveled glass completed the picture of hospitality. Sanji had prepared a feast with chilled lagers and afterwards Indian ice cream in little ceramic pots, a souvenir for the boys to keep and use on their journey back to England. After a sumptuous, tasty dinner, Jean-Paul suggested the boys strip off and take a refreshing hot shower. This was welcomed and the boys innocently tried to shower but found the taps a bit stiff to work. I have no idea why you're laughing. Jean-Paul to the rescue and in the know boldly came into the wet room to, shall we say, help? And take a look at how well hung they were. Being British, the boys were coy and showed it by their body language, so their host quickly retreated. Obviously, they were not up for what he had in mind, perhaps a foursome with Randy Sanjay. Time for bed, but no spare bedroom. Only a sofa in the lounge, which Glenn was quick to take, and thus Nigel was led to Jean-Paul's adjoining study. Through the French windows they went to the big terrace where the loungers were kept. It's not going to happen, you know. This was to be Nigel's final resting place, with more privacy in his sleeping bag for protection. On the way through the study, Nigel was quick to notice several framed black and white, obviously professional photographs of the easily recognizable Pope Jean-Paul II. He said nothing but was determined to go back after his host had retired to bed, taking a closer look. Good nights were said and Nigel could hear the crickets and the whole of the large terrace filled with architectural plants as there was a full moon. He was wide awake and intrigued by the photos, so wearing only his navy blue boxer shorts, he crept back into the study. There were about 6 photographs of Jean-Paul II in darkest Africa with VIPs and dignitaries wearing white robes and skull caps, smiling for the press. Some were stultified in groups, while others were quite natural off-the-record photographs in different places at obviously official engagements. Looking closer and closer, Nigel saw it was his host and not the real Pope. Jean-Paul was, of course, a professional look-alike. Having satisfied his curiosity, he got back into his sleeping bag to curl up for the remainder of the night. To sleep and perchance to dream? Was he dreaming he could feel his arm and shoulder being gently stroked? No, but when he felt his back down to the tip of his coccyx being stroked, I did say coccyx, by the way, he turned and saw in the moonlight a grinning cat-like Jean-Paul. Nigel jumped out of the bag like a cat, fortunately still in his boxers, and was amazed to see his host struggling to do up Nigel's own trousers. Jean-Paul asked young Nigel for help. Seeing that his potential victim was horrified and not going to be seduced and buggered, he coughed nervously and retreated, leaving Nigel with a thumping heart louder than the sound of the crickets. Nigel tossed and turned under the full moon and the stars, listening to the noisy crickets for the rest of the remaining night. Dawn approached, and so, after no sleep that night, Nigel rose, and Jean-Paul amazed his guests by preparing the perfect English breakfast. 2 poached eggs, rounds of crisp toast, 2 pork sausages each, fried soft tomatoes, fried garlic, mushrooms with parsley, and crispy bacon. He then explained he'd been educated in Sandhurst and later gone up to Oxford to study English literature. A perfect ending to an eventful night. Jean-Paul, accompanied by Sanjay, drove the boys to the nearest petrol station to continue on their road to nowhere, waving adieu with a never-to-be-forgotten mysterious smile.